What's up, everyone? Thralls Metal here once again. I'm Necrotic Nick, and we're going to go over some more underrated albums. So I'm sticking with thrash metal, except we're going to go to the early 90s. By then there were tons of different thrash bands out there, and some changes in the sound. You get some more progressive thrash, technical thrash, even death thrash started popping up too. So it was an interesting era for thrash. And this is also, again, something to do during our fun little quarantine. Hope everyone's doing all right out there. You know, if you're feeling sick, stay home. All that jazz. It's not a lot of fun right now, but I'm trying to keep things entertaining at least here. So let's get on with it. Defiance, Void, Terra, Firma. Now this band formed in 1985. This was their second release that came out in 1990. This was also the first one with Steve Esquivel, I think that's how you pronounce his last name, who took over on vocals and definitely sounded a lot like Chuck Billy from Testament. Like, these guys were very comparable to Testament. Except, maybe not quite as talented, but, I mean, Testament's pretty fucking badass, and if you're even getting remotely compared to them, that's pretty damn cool. Very straightforward, Bay Area sound, solid riffs, good hooks. Production's a little so-so, the guitars sound a little, I don't know, dry, I guess. Now this band broke up multiple times. Steve Esquivel ended up leaving the band and forming Skin Lab, which, still around, pretty much just straightforward groove metal, and even flirted with new metal a bit. But they've reformed multiple times, broke up multiple times. According to Encyclopedia Metal, they are active right now. I don't know if they plan on recording anything. I believe Steve Esquivel is still with them and Skin Lab, because Skin Lab just put out an album. So we'll see if these guys actually ever resurface again. But pretty solid release, good little underground band from the Bay Area scene, and definitely worth checking out. Abomination, self-titled. This came out in 1990, and the band itself formed in 1987, and this is just raw, nasty death thrash. This album is flying at all times. Now, this also features Paul Speckman, who is pretty famous for Master, and at this point, he was doing both the bands at the same time. And these guys ended up breaking up and reforming multiple times as well. They came up with a follow-up to this in 1991, which was good, not as good as this. And then broke up for a time while Paul Speckman did Master and came back together. I want to say they released an EP, I'm not entirely sure. But this band's been pretty much fiercely underground ever since their inception. But they're an incredible band. Definitely check out this release. It is pretty much everything you expect out of death thrash. It is just raw, it's fast, you get good death metal riffs, but really cool thrashy, palm muted chugs and such. It's just an awesome listen. Check it out. Re-Animator, Condemned to Eternity. This band formed in the early 80s. This was their debut release in 1990. And these guys had a really interesting, like, more melodic style of thrash, bordering on speed metal. Really cool riff work. They didn't really stand out as much as bands like Onslaught, which Onslaught's definitely one of the more famous English thrash metal bands. And unfortunately, the subsequent releases after this were not that great. Kind of shifted a little bit to groove metal and some cringy album titles and such. It really didn't work out. But this album was really good, and this is definitely the one they should be remembered for. Now, they ended up breaking up in 93, but reformed in 2013, and I believe they released an EP last year. So they're still active, still releasing stuff. I haven't heard this new EP, so I don't know if it's even close to this, but if you're going to check out something by them, definitely check out this, because this is a really solid album, and you know, definitely a fun little underground release. Check it out. Xentrix, For Whose Advantage. This band formed in 1985. This was their second album, came out in 1990, and I absolutely love this one. I picked this up in Florida back in 2018, and I absolutely love the songwriting on here. I think it is like a more technical Metallica. The riffs are just plentiful on this. It is just catchy as hell. Vocals are alright. It kind of sounds a little Hetfield-ish, except with a deeper tone. Now, unfortunately, after this, they kind of tried to change their style a little bit, become a little bit more accessible, and it didn't really work out. And this band is broken up and reformed multiple times. Now, they've been officially reformed since 2013 to now, and in fact, we actually reviewed their most recent album on this channel, and it was a pretty solid banger, too. But still didn't quite hold a candle to this. This is a true little underground gem, and I definitely recommend you guys check it out. Coroner, Mental Vortex. These guys are an awesome three-piece from Switzerland. very technical thrash. They formed in 1983. Now this came out in 1991, and this was a little bit of a stylistic shift. It was a little bit groovier, a little bit more melodic, and I would say accessible to a degree, but they sacrificed none of the riffs on this. It just might not have been as fast. This was the first Coroner album I ever heard, and I absolutely fell in love with it. And then, of course, I heard all the earlier stuff that people rave about, and yes, it's all incredible. Now, they kind of shifted a little bit more towards groove metal with the follow-up Grin, which is a so-so album, and they really haven't put out anything since. But a lot of their earlier stuff is absolutely legendary, but I think this one gets overlooked. It's just as good. It's just a little bit different. I strongly recommend jamming this one. It's one of my favorite Coroner albums. But then again, they only have one album. I think that's just kind of meh. Definitely check it out. It's a good fucking time. Devastation Idolatry. This band formed in Texas in 1986. This was their third and final release in 1991, and it is an absolute banger from start to finish. This is very heavy thrash, occasionally bordering on death metal. It really reminds me a lot of like Sepultura around Beneath the Remains or Rise. Excellent riffs, just heavier than hell. I absolutely adore this album. This was recommended to me by a record store guy, and I picked it up, and it was absolutely amazing. Now, unfortunately, this band kind of had a rough go as far as their history. I guess it was difficult to book gigs, and they were kind of coming at the tail end of thrash, and they just became disenchanted with the music industry and outright broke up. They reformed in like 2008 to 2009 and then broke up again, and they are officially done at this point. But this is one hell of an album. The album before that I thought was really good. I don't have their first album, but I always come back to this one. It's absolutely incredible. If you've never jammed this one, definitely check it out. Fourth entry, As Above, So Below. Now, I brought these guys up in another one of these for their first album, and this is their follow-up album, 1991, and this one's a little bit more lighthearted. I mean, the opening track's called Bone, Crack, and Fever, which, you know, that sounds pretty fucking hilarious, but the true gem on here, the one I always come back to, is We're Dicks. Just listen to that song. It's absolutely hilarious. Now, this was the last full-length these guys released before putting out a really lackluster EP, which was reissued on the first one, and they kind of just shifted to groove metal, and it didn't really work out, and then they pretty much just called it quits. But both of their albums are worth checking out. You get two very different albums. You still get very technical, gritty thrash, but one's a little more serious. This one's definitely a little bit more lighthearted, so it depends what you're in the mood for. Either way, check out either one of their albums. They're both good, but definitely check this one out. It's a lot of fun. Heathen, Victims of Deception. This band formed in 1983. This is their second release in 1991, and this band's incredible. I absolutely love their first album. It's way more straight ahead thrash metal. This is where they really brought in some more technical play. The songwriting became more lavish. I think the vocal performance was even stronger on here, and I absolutely love this release. Lee Altus's guitar work on here is absolutely incredible. And they had a really cool cover of Rainbow's Kill the King on here as well. Now, they broke up in 1993, not too long after this album was released, but reformed in, I want to say 2009 or 2010. Either way, they released an album in 2010 called Evolution of Chaos, which was an absolute banger. And still haven't put out anything, though they're listed as active. I would love to hear more from them, but this right here is probably one of my favorites in this entire stack. Absolutely love this album. If you've never heard Heathen, you're really missing out on some killer thrash metal. Check it out. Sadus, A Vision of Misery. This band formed in the early to mid 80s, and I'm saying that because I forgot to write down the exact year. But this album came out in 1992 and represented a shift in their sound. They were more of a death thrash band, like just really fiercely fast thrash. And this, they kind of shifted to more technical thrash, kind of bordering on prog in some moments. Now, this band is definitely notable because Steve DiGiorgio was in it, and Steve DiGiorgio's played with fucking everybody. Death, Control Denied. He's currently in Testament, and yeah, he's an incredible bassist. He usually plays on a fretless bass, and he does on this album. And the bass work really stands out. It's absolutely excellent because I think that's the only gear this guy has, is just playing excellent bass lines. But yeah, definitely more of a technical thrash album. I really love the songwriting on here, and it definitely showed some songwriting maturity. Now, this band is still active. I think they've been active since their inception. They briefly broke up in 2015 and then reformed in 2016, and they're still going. Steve DiGiorgio is no longer in the band, but both the original drummer and frontman and guitarist are still in there, so who knows, we might actually get a new album. I don't know. Either way, I recommend you check this album out. It's absolutely killer. And finally we have Uncle Slam, Will Work for Food. Now, I discovered Uncle Slam quite a few years ago. I'm a big Suicidal Tendencies fan, and I heard this was a spin-off because these guys have a lot of members that have been through Suicidal Tendencies, and they kind of sound like them a bit. The vocal delivery is very similar to Mike Muir. This is a little bit more straightforward thrash. It doesn't do the punk side as much. And I want to say they're a little bit more humorous than Suicidal. There's less super serious songs, and even if they are serious, they're sort of veiled in tongue-in-cheek, sort of snide humor. They only have 3 releases altogether, this being the second one, so very short-lived band, and they kind of sounded very similar to a band that was already very well established, so yeah, they definitely were more of an underground act, but still a lot of fun. And coming out in 1993, that was when thrash started fading out of the limelight in favor of grunge, groove metal, and even death metal. So yeah, I guess the writing was on the wall. A lot of thrash bands, at least the smaller ones, started breaking up, and the newer bands started changing their sound. These guys definitely put out a killer album though, so definitely check it out. Alright, well that knocks out another one of these. Probably going to skip the late 90s concerning thrash because that really was kind of a death knell area for thrash. There really wasn't a lot of it. All the bigger bands have pretty much moved on to groove metal or just did alternative albums, which, yeah, it wasn't a great time to be a thrash kid. But I'm definitely going to go into the resurgence that happened in the 2000s because all of a sudden thrash just started popping up everywhere again, and I found a lot of new bands that I absolutely loved. So definitely stay tuned for that. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because if you subscribe, you're entered in a giveaway for a Cryptopsy hoodie. Once we hit 1,000 subs, which we are 20 away from it, we are going to do a little randomizer thing, and one of you lucky people are going to win a Cryptopsy hoodie. That's pretty fucking cool, right? Either way, thank you guys very much for watching, and I will catch you later.